She slept every night with the lamp lit. He lived with his left sleeve buttoned. Between them, a castle still healing, and one circled date on a page neither of them could bring themselves to name. The story is being written in this very moment. The 8th year common room had gone quiet hours ago, the kind of quiet that only a castle in convalescence could produce. Not silence exactly, but the low, breathing hush of old stone, remembering what it had survived. Somewhere far below, a suit of armour shifted on its plinth. A portrait 2 corridors away murmured in its sleep. The fire in the head study had burned down to its final stratum of embers, and the embers themselves were the colour of a fading bruise. Hermione Granger had gone to bed at 11, as she always did now. She did not sleep at 11. She simply went through the motions a person who slept would go through, because performing the shape of rest was, on most nights, the closest she could come to the thing itself. Her lamp still burned beside her pillow. It had burned every night since May. Draco Malfoy was alone in the study, and he preferred it that way. He had stayed behind to finish the patrol roster. Granger's handwriting on one side of the parchment, his own on the other, 2 scripts that had learned, over the last month, not to touch. She wrote in a steady, looping hand that slanted forward as though she were always walking into her own sentences. He wrote narrow and upright, the way his tutors had taught him when he was 6, and his grandfather had rapped his knuckles for the slightest curve. The parchment between them was the truest map of their uneasy cohabitation. 2 languages negotiating a border. He set down his quill. The ink was the colour of wet slate. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with the heel of his hand, and, in doing so, dislodged a stack of profits that had been piled on the corner of the desk. A fortnight's worth, which Granger collected with the methodical grimness of a woman cataloguing her own wreckage. The stack slid. He caught most of it. One sheet, yellowed at the edge from the radiator's heat, floated down and came to rest against his boot. He almost did not look at it. He had trained himself this year in the particular discipline of not looking. Not at her scar when her sleeve rode up. Not at the hollow beneath her cheekbone that had not been there before. Not at the way her hands sometimes went to her throat when a door slammed too hard. He had become an expert in the geography of his own averted gaze. But the page at his boot had a date on it, circled in pencil, and the pencil had been hers. He recognized the pressure of the lead, the slight tremor at the end of the stroke that meant her hand had been tired. September 19th. He bent to pick it up before he could decide not to. It was an old clipping from the summer of the victory, one of those interminable features the prophet had run in the weeks after the battle, photographs of the surviving trio, potted biographies, a list of orders of Merlin pending review. Under her photograph in small print, the usual, Hermione Granger, born September 19th, 1979, Hampstead, London. The date had been circled, not with care, with something harder. The pencil had gone through the parchment in one place, a small tear no wider than a fingernail. She had circled it, and then, he suspected, not known what to do with the fact that she had circled it, and so had slid it beneath the others and forgotten it, or pretended to. Draco stood very still. The fire gave a small collapsing sound as a log gave up its last structure and went to ash. September 19th, he thought. And the thought arrived with the same cold, oriented precision as a compass needle finding north. That is in 11 days. He did not know why this information, which belonged to him in no way whatsoever, settled in his chest with the weight of something owed. He did not know why his first instinct was to put the clipping back exactly as he had found it, face down, corner aligned, as though the act of having seen it could be undone by the act of pretending he had not. He did know, and this was the part that made the muscle along his jaw pull taut, that she had not mentioned it to anyone. Not Potter, not the Weasley girl, not the red-haired one who trailed after her in the corridors like a man following a candle he was afraid would go out. There had been no whispered plans in the common room, no conspicuous silences when she entered a room, no parcels smuggled under cloaks. The castle did not know. Her friends did not know. She had not told them. He understood that with a clarity that unsettled him. He understood it the way one recognizes one's own handwriting on a letter one does not remember sending. He understood because he had done the same thing with his own birthday in June, had let it pass like any other morning, had sat at breakfast and eaten toast and felt the date pass through him the way weather passes through a window. To announce a birthday after the year they had survived would be to ask the world to celebrate the fact of your continuing. And neither of them, it seemed, could quite bring themselves to make that request. He set the clipping back. He aligned the corner. He placed the other prophets on top of it in the order he had found them, and then he moved one 1/4 of an inch because he could not bear for her to suspect when she came down in the morning that anyone had been through her papers. Then he stood at the desk for a long time, one hand flat against the wood, and tried to locate the feeling that had opened in him. It was not pity. He had come to understand this year that pity was a thing you offered from a height, and he no longer stood anywhere high enough. It was not guilt, or not only guilt, though guilt was always present now, a low, constant pressure behind his sternum, the way a room one has damaged never quite stops smelling of the damage. It was something narrower and more particular. It was the recognition that a person he had spent 6 years despising and one night watching bleed on his drawing-room floor had a birthday in 11 days and did not want anyone to know. And he, of all people, had been given the knowledge. He, of all people. The injustice of it, that this small, private fact had fallen into his hands, made him close his eyes briefly. There was a particular cruelty in the universe's sense of distribution. He did not deserve to know the shape of her grief. He did not deserve to know which date she had circled so hard the pencil had broken the page. And yet, he picked up his quill again. He dipped it. He held it above the roster for a long moment and did not write. A single drop of ink gathered at the nib and fell and bloomed on the parchment in a small black star over Tuesday. He stared at it until it stopped being ink and started being something else. A decision he had not yet made, darkening in front of him. Somewhere above, on the girls' staircase, a floorboard settled. He did not know she was awake. He did not know that she had been awake for an hour already, lying on her side with her wand tucked beneath her pillow and her eyes open in the lamplight, listening to the castle breathe. He did not know that she had heard him come in, that she had identified him by the particular cadence of his footfall, slower than Potter's, heavier than Longbottom's, without the small skip Ginny's step had when she was happy. She had learned all of their footsteps. It was one of the small, quiet, awful vigilances she had brought back from the tent and never managed to set down. She heard him linger. She heard the soft shuffle of parchment. She heard, faintly, the sound of a quill being set into its stand with unusual care. She did not know what he had seen. She did not yet know that something in the room below her had shifted by the width of a hair, and that the shift would find its way to her by morning, the way weather finds its way in under a door. She only knew that Malfoy, who had once filled a room with his voice, had become a person whose silences had weight, and that, some nights, she would not have said this aloud under any curse. She listened for those silences the way one listens against one's better judgment, for a sound one has told oneself one no longer wants to hear. Below, in the study, Draco picked up the roster and folded it. He banked the fire. He put out the last candle with his fingers, the way his mother had taught him, pinching the wick so the smoke would not rise. At the door, with his hand on the latch, he paused. He looked back once, at the desk, at the stack of profits, at the corner of parchment he had realigned. 11 days, he thought. And then, because the thought frightened him in a way he was not prepared to name, he stepped into the corridor and let the door close behind him, very quietly, so as not to wake the girl upstairs, who, he did not know, had already been awake for the better part of an hour, waiting for the sound of him leaving. Morning arrived the way mornings arrived now, not as an event, but as a slow, grey concession. The light that came through the head's study window was the colour of pewter left too long in water. It settled on the desk, on the banked ashes, on the neat stack of profits, whose top edge had been realigned by 1/4 of an inch, and would never be aligned exactly that way by its owner again. Hermione came down at 7, as she always did. Her hair was tied back in the severe plait she had adopted since May, a plait that said, to anyone who knew how to read it, "Do not look at me closely this morning." She had slept perhaps 2 hours. The skin beneath her eyes had the translucent quality of a page held up to weak light. She crossed to the desk. She registered, with the faint prickle at the nape of her neck that had become her most reliable companion, that something in the room had been touched, not moved, touched. She could not have said how she knew, only that the air above the desk had the particular quality air has when a hand has recently passed through it. She lifted the roster, her own handwriting on the left, his on the right. Tuesday had an ink stain over it, a small black bloom she did not remember making. She frowned. She had not dripped ink on Tuesday. She was meticulous about such things, or had been in the life where she had not spent every evening pretending to read a book she was not reading. She set the roster down. She picked up the top profit, set it down, picked up the second, set it down. The third was the one she did not pick up, because the corner of it showed the edge of a clipping she had circled in pencil in July and then slid beneath the others, and then, on 3 separate nights since, almost thrown into the fire, and then, each of those times, not. She stood very still above it. She did not lift it. She did not need to. She knew what was beneath the corner, and she knew that she had left the stack in a different order. She was certain of it, with the certainty of a person who has learned to remember everything, because forgetting has become dangerous. And she knew, therefore, that someone had been through them. There were only 2 people with access to this room. She sat down in the chair he had occupied the night before. The wood held no warmth. It had been hours. But she sat in it anyway and placed her palms flat on the desk where his palms had been flat, and she tried to reason through the thing. He would not, she thought, tell anyone. It was a strange thought to arrive at, and she examined it the way she examined a theorem, turning it for its flaws. He would not tell anyone. She knew this in a place beneath argument. The Malfoy of their 4th year would have walked into the great hall at lunch and made an announcement of it. The Malfoy of their 6th year would have hoarded it the way he had hoarded every scrap of information that might be weaponized later. But the Malfoy who lived in the room across the landing from her now, the one who set down quills instead of handing them to her, the one whose voice had gone low and infrequent, the one who kept his left sleeve buttoned even in the heat, that Malfoy would not tell anyone. She did not know when she had begun to believe this about him. It unsettled her to discover the belief fully formed, as though it had grown in her while she slept. She pressed her palms harder against the wood. What she resented, and resentment was the cleanest of the feelings available to her, and so she reached for it, was that he now knew. Of all the people in the castle who might have stumbled on the clipping, it had been him. Potter would have brought it to her with both hands and a worried face. Ginny would have organized something. Ron would have baked badly and presented the result in a tin. Any of them would have made it a thing, and she would have had to perform gratitude, and the performance would have cost her the last of a reserve she could not afford to spend. But Malfoy would do nothing. Malfoy would say nothing. Malfoy would simply know, and his knowing would sit in the room with her like a 4th presence, and she would not be able to speak of it or ask about it or put it down. It was, she thought, with a small, unwelcome laugh that had no humour in it. It was almost worse than being congratulated. She heard his step on the landing. She did not turn. She busied herself with the roster. She took up her quill. She began, quite deliberately, to write Wednesday's patrol assignments in a hand that was steadier than her pulse. He came in. He paused briefly in the doorway. She heard the pause, the half-beat of hesitation before he committed to entering. And then he crossed to the sideboard where the tea things were kept and began, with the quiet competence he had developed this year, to pour water from the ewer into the kettle. Granger. His voice was low. It had been low for months. She had stopped being surprised by it. Malfoy. He did not ask if she wanted tea. He simply made enough for 2, as he had for the last 3 weeks, and set the second cup on the corner of the desk nearest her elbow, on a coaster, because he had learned that she did not like rings on the wood. She did not thank him. They had established weeks ago and without discussion that thanks would make the thing awkward, and so neither of them offered it. She kept writing. He took his own cup to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the courtyard where a single house elf was sweeping leaves with a broom twice its height. The silence in the room had a new texture. She could feel it. It was no longer the silence of two people who had decided not to speak to each other. It was the silence of one person holding something and the other person knowing they were holding it. She wrote 3 lines of the roster without reading what she was writing. "The 4th years," he said, still at the window, "should not patrol the dungeons alone. One of us should take them." "I know. I'll do Tuesday." "Fine." Her quill scratched. The fire, someone, a house elf presumably, had rekindled it, gave a small domestic crackle. Outside, the elf's broom moved across the flagstones with a rhythm like a heartbeat, slowed almost to sleep. She did not look at him. She could feel him not looking at her. It occurred to her, and the thought arrived with a small, cold shock, like a hand laid flat between her shoulder blades, that this was the most intimate silence she had shared with anyone since the war. The thought was so absurd that she set down the quill. He turned at the small sound. Their eyes met across the room. His were the particular grey of the light on the desk, of the ashes in the grate, a grey that had forgotten what to do with itself. He looked at her for perhaps 2 seconds, no longer, and in those 2 seconds she watched him perform the small specific discipline she had come to recognize in him. The not looking at her left forearm, the not looking at the hollow beneath her cheekbone, the not looking at anything that might constitute evidence. He looked away first. He always looked away first now. It was one of the things about him that confused her most, because she remembered, with a clarity she wished she did not have, a boy who had never looked away first from anyone. "I'll be at breakfast," he said. "All right." He set his cup on the sideboard. He crossed to the door. At the door he paused again, the same half-beat, and she thought for one suspended instant that he was going to say something else, something specific, something that would make it impossible to go on pretending that the stack of profits on the desk was the same stack it had been yesterday. He did not. He left. She sat in his chair for some time after the door closed. Her tea cooled at her elbow. She did not drink it. She watched the light move by increments across the wood, and she thought with a kind of bewildered precision, "He knows, and he is not going to do anything about it, and I do not know which of those 2 things is worse." The day that followed had the peculiar stretched quality of days in which nothing happens, and something is, underneath, happening constantly. She went to arithmancy. She took notes. She answered a question about recursive probability with her usual crispness, and Professor Vector smiled at her the way Professor Vector always smiled at her, which was the smile of a woman who had never been asked whether she slept. At lunch, she sat between Ginny and Luna. She ate half a bread roll. Malfoy, at the end of the Slytherin table, ate nothing she could see and left before the pudding. In the afternoon, she shelved books in the library for an hour. She had taken to doing this voluntarily because the repetitive motion of slotting a spine into its place soothed something in her that nothing else reached. And she became aware, at some point in the second shelf, that she was being watched. She did not turn. She reached for the next book. She placed it. She reached for the next. The back of her neck prickled with the particular sensation of a gaze that was careful not to be a gaze, a looking that was constantly being converted, mid-glance, into a looking elsewhere. When she finally permitted herself to turn her head, the alcove behind her was empty. But a book had been left on the reading table, opened to a page, and she crossed to it, and she saw that it was a monograph on the language of wildflowers, a thing she had mentioned 2 weeks ago in passing, in a conversation she had not thought anyone was listening to. The page was open to September. She stood above it for a long time. She did not touch it. She did not close it. She left it exactly as it was, because to close it would be to acknowledge it, and to acknowledge it would be to begin a conversation she was not, on this afternoon, 10 days before her birthday, prepared to have. She walked out of the library with her hands pressed flat against her ribs, as though to hold something in that had begun, very quietly, to move. The book stayed on the reading table for 3 days. She knew, because she went back to check. Not to read it, she did not permit herself that, but to confirm its continued existence, the way one confirms in the dark that a door is still locked. Each afternoon she passed through the library on her way to somewhere else, and each afternoon her eyes performed the small involuntary sweep of the alcove, and each afternoon the monograph was exactly where it had been left, open to September, the page weighted at one corner by a smooth grey pebble she had not noticed the first time, and which had, she suspected, not been there the first time. On the 4th day, the book was gone. She stood in the empty alcove for longer than she meant to. The absence of the book was, in its way, louder than its presence had been. Someone had come for it. Someone had come and lifted it and carried it away, and the pebble too. And the gesture of retrieval felt, strangely, more deliberate than the gesture of leaving. She went looking for him. She did not phrase it to herself that way. She told herself she was going to the head's study to finish the Tuesday roster. She told herself she needed a reference from the restricted section. She told herself any number of reasonable, bookish things, and she walked through 3 corridors and 2 staircases, telling herself these things. And when she turned the corner into the long gallery above the courtyard, and saw him at the far end of it, standing at one of the narrow windows, his forehead nearly touching the glass, she stopped walking and understood that she had been looking for him since breakfast. He did not hear her approach. The gallery was long and the flagstones old, and she had learned, like him, to walk without announcing herself. She stood perhaps 10 paces behind him and watched his back for a moment. He had one hand braced against the stone beside the window. The other was at his side, and even from this distance she could see the deliberate stillness of it, the way his fingers were not curled, not clenched, but held open in the specific way a person holds a hand that wants to do something the person has forbidden it to do. Malfoy. He turned without startling. He had known, perhaps, for several seconds. His face, in the grey light from the window, had the composure of a man who had rehearsed the composure very recently. Granger. The book. Which book? The one on wildflowers. His jaw moved once, not a clench, a small adjustment as though he were resettling something behind his teeth. I don't know what you mean. You do. He looked at her fully, then, for the first time in what she realized had been days. The grey of his eyes had a weather in it she could not name. If someone left a book in the library, Granger, I'd suggest it was a student who forgot where they were sitting. It was open to September. A coincidence. There was a pebble on it. A common feature of libraries. She took a step closer. She had not intended to. Her feet had simply made the decision without consulting her. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what? Don't lie to me in that tone. Not now. It's beneath you." It was the wrong thing to say, and she knew it the instant the word beneath left her mouth, because the flinch that went through him was so small that anyone who had not spent the last 4 weeks learning the specific grammar of his restraint would have missed it entirely. But she had spent those 4 weeks, and she saw it. And she saw him absorb it, saw him take the word beneath and file it somewhere behind his sternum in the place where he kept everything that was beneath him and everything he was beneath. And she felt, with a sudden, sick lurch, as though she had struck at a bruise she had not meant to find. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" I didn't mean." "You did, rather." His voice was very even. "And you were right to. I was lying." The admission undid her more than the lie had. She opened her mouth and found nothing in it. He looked back out of the window. The courtyard below had emptied of its single house elf. A few leaves moved in small, aimless circles across the stone, the way leaves do in wind that cannot quite commit to a direction. "I saw the clipping," he said, to the glass, not to her. "In the study. It fell. I picked it up. I put it back." She did not speak. "I shouldn't have looked at the date. I did. That was my trespass, and I won't pretend otherwise." The book. The book was... He stopped. He considered. When he spoke again, his voice was a fraction lower, as though it had to pass through something on its way out. "The book was a mistake. I thought... I don't know what I thought. That you might like to find something. That nobody else would know what it was. I didn't think further than that." "You left it open to September?" "Yes." "For me to find?" "Yes." "That's not nothing, Malfoy." "I know." She pressed her palm flat against the stone of the nearest pillar. The stone was cold. The cold steadied her. She could feel, beneath the cold, the faint hum the castle had developed this year. A low vibration in the walls that Madame Pince said was the magic settling back into its proper seams after the battle. It had begun to feel to Hermione like a pulse, as though the castle had a heart that had survived, as she had, by learning to beat more carefully. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why do anything? Why not simply have forgotten it? Put the clipping back and forgotten it. You didn't owe me. Don't." It was the first time in months he had interrupted her. The word came out sharper than his voice had been, and it landed between them like a dropped coin, and they both looked at it for a moment before either of them moved. "Don't tell me what I owe you," he said, more quietly. "Please." She stared at him. The please was what did it. She could have held against the interruption. She could have held against the grey of his eyes, and the still hand, and the confession about the clipping. But the please, unornamented, unadorned, the smallest and most unguarded word in his vocabulary, opened something in her chest she had been holding shut with both hands. Her own hand, the one not pressed against the pillar, lifted a fraction, half an inch, no more. It lifted toward him the way a compass needle lifts toward its pole, without consulting the compass, without asking permission, and she became aware of it only when it had already begun to move. She stopped it. She forced it back to her side. She clenched it into a fist so tight that her nails, she had bitten them down in June and had only recently let them grow, pressed small new crescents into her palm. He had seen the movement. Of course he had. He saw everything now. It was one of the terrifying things about him. He did not remark on it. "The pebble," she said, because she had to say something, and because her voice, by some miracle, was still working. "Why the pebble?" He looked at her. His mouth did something that was not a smile, but was the place a smile might have come from, once in a life neither of them had lived. "To keep the page open." "Oh, and because—" He stopped. Because my mother used to put a stone on a book when she meant to come back to it. I didn't think about that until after I'd done it. I thought about it for some time afterwards." She did not know what to do with this. She did not know what to do with the image of Narcissa Malfoy weighting a book with a stone, or with the idea that her son had stood in the library with a pebble in his hand and placed it on a page for her because some old private gesture of his mother's had surfaced in him without permission. She did not know what to do with the fact that he had told her this. She did not know what to do with any of it, and so she did the thing she had always done when a situation exceeded her capacity, which was to retreat into information. "September," she said. "What did it say?" "Granger." "What did the page say, Malfoy?" He looked at her for a long moment. The grey in his eyes had shifted again. Not softened. Sharpened, rather, the way a thing sharpens when it is being prevented from doing what it wants to do. "Asters," he said. "Michaelmas daisies." The language was patience, remembrance, and one other that I didn't... He stopped. "That you didn't what?" "That I didn't expect to find listed." "Which was?" He did not answer. He turned his face back to the glass, and for a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the gallery was the small, aimless circling of leaves in the courtyard below. "Afterthought," he said. "The flower for afterthought. I hadn't known that before." Hermione did not move. The words sat between them like a small, carefully placed stone. She was aware, in some distant part of herself, that her hand had lifted again, that it had come up halfway to his sleeve before she caught it, that she had caught it a second time and held it at her own side in a grip so tight she could feel her own pulse in it. She was aware that the gallery had gone, for her, to a kind of hush in which even the castle's low hum had stopped, and that her breath, when she next drew one, would have to be drawn past something in her throat that had not been there a minute before. He did not turn from the window. He did not have to. She stood behind him for several more seconds, her hand at her side, her palm open now, her fingers loose. Then, without speaking, she walked back down the gallery the way she had come, and she did not look at the pillar she had leaned against, and she did not stop until she had reached the staircase, and on the first step she paused and laid her forehead, very briefly, against the cold iron of the banister, and she stayed that way for a count of 3 before she lifted her head and went on. The storm announced itself at dusk. It came from the west, slow at first, a thickening of the light behind the forbidden forest that made the tops of the pines look as though they had been drawn in heavier ink. The wind arrived before the rain. It moved through the courtyard in one long, considering breath, lifting the leaves that had been circling aimlessly for days and sending them, at last, somewhere, against the cloisters, into the hollows of the flagstones, up against the locked door of the greenhouse where Neville had forgotten, again, to take in the pots. By 8, the first drops struck the windows. By 9, the glass in the head study was running with water, and the fire, which had been laid at 7, had settled into the low, crackling intimacy that fires keep only on nights when the weather outside is loud enough to remind a room that it is a room. Hermione had not gone to dinner. She had told herself she was not hungry. She had told herself she had reading to do. She had told herself a number of small, serviceable things, each of them true in a narrow sense, and false in the sense that mattered. And she had stayed in the study with a book open on her lap that she had not turned a page of in 40 minutes. September 18th. Tomorrow was the day she had not told anyone about. Tomorrow was the day a boy with grey eyes and a mother who weighted books with stones had known about for 10 days and done nothing with, except leave a monograph in a library alcove and tell her in a long gallery with wind in the courtyard about a flower for afterthought. She had not seen him since. He had not come to breakfast on the 5th day. He had not come to lunch. At dinner on the 5th day, he had entered the great hall for exactly as long as it took to collect a plate, and had left with it, and had not come back. She had marked each of these absences with a precision that frightened her when she noticed it, because she had been counting without meaning to, and the counting had acquired over the last 72 hours the quality of a small private hunger. She closed the book. The fire popped. The rain thickened. Somewhere above her, on the landing, a door opened and closed, and she recognized the cadence of the step on the stone, and her whole body went still, the way an animal goes still when it understands that what it has been waiting for is in the room. He did not come down. She heard him cross the landing. She heard him pause, a half-beat, the same half-beat he always paused at the threshold of a room she was in. And then she heard him go on, past the stair, toward the window at the end of the corridor where the storm was loudest. She heard him stop there. She sat for a long count. Then she got up. She did not take a candle. The corridor was lit by the intermittent, watery blue of the lightning, and by the single torch in its sconce at the far end, and she did not need a candle to find him. He was exactly where she had thought he would be. At the window, one shoulder against the stone, his forehead close to the glass. He was in shirt sleeves. The shirt was white, or had been once. In the blue light from the window, it had the colour of a thing left too long in water. He did not turn. "Granger, how do you know it's me? You walk as though you were apologising to the floor." The observation was so unexpected and so exact that she gave a small involuntary sound that was not a laugh, but was, perhaps, the country a laugh came from. "That's," she began, "true. Rude. Also true." She came to stand beside him, not close, perhaps the width of 2 flagstones between them. The window ran with rain. The courtyard below had gone to a sheet of moving water. The flagstones were no longer flagstones, but a dark, rippling mirror in which the torches on the far cloister guttered and reformed and guttered again. Lightning moved behind the forest. The thunder that followed was distant, a low rolling sound, like something heavy being dragged across a floor in a room 2 stories up. They stood for a long time without speaking. This was, she realized, the longest they had ever been silent together, without a desk or a roster or a book between them. The silence had no task to perform. It was simply a silence, and it had the specific texture of rain against glass, and it held. "You haven't eaten," he said. "Neither have you." "No." The window fogged faintly where his breath met the glass. He lifted a hand and, with the side of his thumb, cleared a small arc in the condensation. The gesture was absent, unthinking, the gesture of a man who had stood at windows often in his life. And she watched the arc of clearness appear, and she watched a drop of water outside the glass slide through it, and she had the sudden disordered thought that she would remember this small, mundane motion of his hand on the window for the rest of her life, and she did not know what to do with the thought, so she set it aside. "Malfoy." "Yes." "Why are you standing here?" He was quiet. A long roll of thunder passed somewhere over the lake. "The window in my room faces east," he said finally. "This one faces west. The storm is coming from the west." "That's not an answer." "No." She waited. "I wanted," he said slowly, as though the words were being measured out of him one at a time, "to see it arrive. I don't often want to see things arrive anymore. I wanted to see this." She understood him. She understood him with a clarity that was almost unbearable, because she had stood at her own window 100 nights in the past 4 months, wanting and failing to want anything to arrive. Not morning, not letters, not the hours ahead. And she understood that what he was telling her in the sideways, careful way he told her things now was that something in him had begun, recently, to want again. And she understood further that he was not telling her what the something was, because he had not given himself permission to name it. Her hand lifted. She was not surprised by it this time. She had been expecting it, in a way. She had understood on the staircase 3 days ago, with her forehead against the iron of the banister, that her hand was going to lift toward him again, and that one of these times she was not going to stop it. She stopped it anyway, but only halfway. Her hand came up to the level of his sleeve and hovered there in the blue light, perhaps 2 inches from the white cotton of his cuff, and neither of them looked at it, and both of them knew it was there. "Tomorrow," she said. She had not meant to say the word. It came out of her the way water comes out of a glass that has been tilted too far without permission. He did not move. "I know," he said. "I haven't. I know. I don't want. I know. Stop saying that." "All right." She closed her eyes. The rain on the glass was very loud suddenly, as though the storm had stepped closer to listen. "I don't know what I want," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so low that if the window had not been so close, she would not have heard him over the rain. "I don't want anything from you, Granger. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever I've done or may do, I'm not..." He stopped. He breathed out. "I'm not collecting on anything. I don't have a ledger." "I know you don't. I needed to say it. I know." Her hand, which had been hovering at his sleeve, lowered itself, not to her side, to the stone of the windowsill, very near his own hand, perhaps an inch of ancient granite between them. She did not look at the space between their hands. She looked, instead, at the courtyard, where the water was moving in slow, aimless patterns over the flagstones. And she thought how strange it was that water, in motion, always looked like it was remembering something. He did not move his hand. He did not move it closer. He did not move it away. It stayed exactly where it was, and she understood without words that he was holding it in the precise position he had held it in at the gallery 3 days before. Open, still, forbidden. And she understood that he was not going to close the inch between them, because he did not believe he had the right to. And she understood, with a small, quiet shock, that the inch was hers. It had been hers all along. It would always be hers. He would not cross it. He would stand on his side of it for as long as he had to, for as many nights as it took, and he would not cross it. The understanding broke something in her that she had not known was still whole. Malfoy. Yes. Go to bed. He turned his head. He looked at her, finally, the first time that night. His eyes were very dark in the low light, and there was a question in them. And the question was, not why are you sending me away? The question was, are you all right? And she almost came apart at the shape of it. I mean it kindly, she said. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. Go to bed. I will be all right. I cannot stand here with you for another minute tonight. Not tonight. Do you understand? Yes. He lifted his hand from the sill. He did it carefully, without brushing hers. He stepped back from the window. At the threshold of the corridor that led to the stairs, he paused. He did not turn. Granger. Yes. Sleep with the lamp lit if you need to. I won't say anything. To anyone. Ever. And he was gone, and the corridor was empty, and the rain on the glass was the only sound in the world, and Hermione Granger stood at the window with one hand on the sill where his had been, and the other pressed flat against her mouth. And she did not cry, because she had not cried since May. But she stood there for a long time afterwards, listening to the storm, and at some point she realized she had stopped counting her own breaths, which was a thing she had not stopped doing in 4 months. She woke to the sound of nothing. For a long moment she did not understand what had changed. The room was grey with the kind of early light that belongs to a morning after a storm, when the world has been washed and is not yet sure what to do with itself. The rain had stopped. The wind had stopped. The castle, which had creaked and moaned through the night with the sound of an old ship riding weather, had gone still, and the stillness itself was what had woken her. That and the lamp. She turned her head on the pillow. The lamp beside her bed, which had burned every night since the night she had left the tent, had gone out. Not been extinguished. She could see the wick was whole, the oil still full in its reservoir. It had simply burned through, as lamps did in the small hours, and she had not woken to relight it. She had slept past it. She had slept in the dark. She lay very still. It was the 19th of September. She was 19 years old. She had survived a war and a forest and a drawing-room floor and 4 months of lamplight. And she had slept, at last, in the dark. And she did not know what to do with the fact. She did not know how long she lay there. The light at the window shifted by small degrees from pewter to the pale washed gold of a sun that had not quite committed to rising. At some point, she heard, in the corridor, the soft scuff of a house elf's footfall. At some point, she heard a door, very distantly, close. At some point, she became aware that there was something on the floor just inside her own door. She sat up. She did not rise immediately. She looked at the thing for a long moment from the bed, the way one looks at a letter one has not yet opened. It was small. It was wrapped. No, it was covered. Covered was the better word. A square of what looked like plain brown paper had been laid over it. Not folded, not tied, simply placed, the way one might lay a cloth over a bird that had flown into a window and was stunned and ought to be given quiet. She got up. The floor was cold through her stockings. She crossed to the door. She knelt. She lifted the paper. Beneath it, on a square of darker cloth that she recognized, after a moment, as a linen napkin from the head study, lay 3 things. The first was a pebble, smooth, grey, slightly oblong, the size of the pad of her thumb. The same pebble, she understood at once, that had weighted the monograph in the library, or one so like it that the distinction was immaterial. It had been polished slightly, not with a charm, with a thumb over days. The second was a sprig of Michaelmas daisy, a single stem, pale purple, the small flower still holding a bead of rain in its centre. He must have gone out for it that morning, she realized, early, before the sun had finished rising. The greenhouses did not grow asters. The wild ones grew along the lake path, in the verge beside the old boathouse, and he had walked out in the wet grass and cut one and brought it back and set it on a napkin on her floor and gone. The third was a folded slip of parchment. She lifted it last. Her hands were not steady. She noted this with a distant, clinical part of her mind. She, Hermione Granger, who had held a wand level under a Cruciatus, noted that her hands were not steady, and she did not bother to steady them, because there was no one there to see, and because for the first time in months she did not care to pretend. She unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was his, narrow, upright, precise, a single line. I will not wish you anything. I only wanted you to know the day is not unmarked. No signature. She sat down on the cold floor with her back against the door, the napkin across her knees, and she read the line again, and she read it a 3rd time, and she understood that he had chosen each word of it as carefully as he had chosen the pebble. He had not written happy. He had not written many. He had not performed the small social lie of a birthday greeting, because he had understood, as no one else in the castle had understood, that the word happy was not a word she could carry today. He had written, "The day is not unmarked," and she understood, reading it, that what he had given her was not a gift in the ordinary sense. He had given her a witness. He had said, "I saw it. I saw the date. I will not make you perform anything, but I will not let it pass in silence, because you do not deserve to pass through your own birthday unseen." She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. She did not cry. She had not cried since May, and she did not cry now. But something was happening to her breathing that had not happened in a long time. A loosening of something behind her sternum that she had held tight for so many months that she had forgotten it could loosen. She sat on the floor with the napkin across her knees and the pebble in her palm and the Michaelmas daisy beside her and the single line of his handwriting in her other hand. And she let her breathing do what it had not been permitted to do for 4 months, which was simply to be uneven for a while without her correcting it. After some time, she set the parchment down. She picked up the pebble. She turned it in her fingers. She thought about Narcissa Malfoy weighting a book with a stone. She thought about a boy in a long gallery saying my mother used to. She thought about the fact that he had given her a thing his mother had taught him, and that he had not told her it was a thing his mother had taught him, because to say so twice would have been to make a ceremony of it, and he had not made a ceremony of any of it. She got up. She did not get dressed immediately. She stood at her window for a while, holding the pebble, watching the light finish its arrival over the lake. The water was perfectly still. The storm had gone east. A single heron stood on one leg in the shallows near the boathouse, and she thought, absurdly, she, who did not think absurd things, that the heron looked like a person considering a decision. She dressed, not in the plait, in her hair down, which she had not worn down in the castle since May. She did not examine why. She put the pebble in the pocket of her robes, where it settled against her thigh with a small, secret weight. She put the sprig of Michaelmas daisy in a glass of water on her desk. She folded the parchment and put it in the inside pocket of her robes, against her ribs, where she could feel it when she breathed. She went down to breakfast. She did not know what she was going to do. She did not know specifically whether she was going to speak to him or whether she was going to let the day pass with the gift accepted in silence, the way he had accepted her silences for months. She did not know. She thought it possible that she might not decide until she saw him. She did not see him. He was not at the Slytherin table. He was not in the entrance hall. He was not in the head's study when she passed the open door on her way back from breakfast. He had made himself absent on purpose, she understood, and the understanding was another gift, though a smaller and more complicated one. He had understood that if she wanted to find him, she would, and if she did not want to find him, he would not be in any room she entered by accident. She thought for perhaps an hour about not finding him. It would be easier. It would be cleaner. She could keep the pebble in her pocket and the daisy in her glass and the parchment against her ribs. And she could go to arithmancy, and she could go to charms, and she could let the day pass. And tomorrow the lamp would either relight itself at her bedside, or it would not. And either way the gift would have done its work, which was to tell her that someone had seen. She thought about it. And then, at 11 in the morning, with her wand in her hand and her hair still down, she walked out of the castle and down the path to the lake, because she knew, without knowing how she knew, with the same unreasoning certainty that had told her on the first morning that he would not tell anyone, that he would be at the boathouse. He was. He was sitting on the lower step, his elbows on his knees, his hands loose between them. He had not heard her yet. He was looking out at the water, at the place where the heron had been, although the heron was gone now. In the grass beside him lay a small pair of silver scissors, the kind his mother used, she thought, to cut flowers in the garden at a house that had once been beautiful and had now been given over to the Ministry for the Containment of Dark Objects. He had used his mother's scissors to cut her a flower. She did not move for a moment. He heard her eventually. He did not turn. He did not get up. Granger, Malfoy, don't. It was not sharp. It was almost pleading. The word came out of him before she had taken another step, as though he had known what she was going to say and was asking her, very quietly, not to say it. Don't what? She said. Don't thank me." She came down the path. She did not go to him. She stopped perhaps 3 paces from the step he was sitting on, and she stood with her hands at her sides, and she looked at his bent head, and at the line of his shoulders, and at the loose, careful hands between his knees. And she understood that she was not going to thank him, because he was right. To thank him would be to make it a transaction, and it had never been a transaction. "I wasn't going to," she said. He looked up. His eyes in the full morning light were not grey at all. They were a pale colour that had no proper name. The colour, she thought, of the sky just before it decided what kind of day it was going to be. And they were looking at her, fully, without the discipline of the avert, for what she realized was the first time since May. She took the pebble out of her pocket. She held it in her open palm, between them, where the sun could reach it. "I slept," she said, "in the dark, last night, for the first time." He did not answer. He did not need to. His hand, which had been loose between his knees, closed very slowly into a fist. Not in anger. In the specific way a hand closes when a person has been given something they do not know how to hold. The lake made small sounds against the stones. They were the only sounds for a while. A little slap of water, and then another, and then the dry rattle of reeds moving against each other in a wind so faint it could not quite be called wind. The heron had not come back. A dragonfly passed between them once, at the height of her wrist, and kept going. Draco did not open his hand. She watched him not open it. She watched the knuckles whiten, and then unwhiten, as he regulated whatever was passing through him. She watched him close his eyes, briefly, a single long blink, the sort of blink that is a person gathering themselves behind their own face, and then open them and look at her again. "Sit down, Granger." She considered the step. It was wet from the storm. She sat down anyway at the other end of it, perhaps 2 feet of weathered wood between them. She kept the pebble in her open palm. It warmed slowly against her skin. "You should eat something," he said. "I had breakfast." "Half a piece of toast isn't breakfast." "You were watching me." "I wasn't in the hall." "Exactly." He almost smiled. It was the nearest thing to a smile she had seen on him in a year. A small, one-sided pull at the corner of his mouth that did not last long enough for either of them to acknowledge. He looked back out at the water. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I would like you, if you can, not to interrupt me. I've been composing it for 4 months, and if you stop me, I don't know that I'll be able to find the end of it again." Her throat closed. "All right." He did not look at her. That was part of how he was going to be able to do it, she understood. He was going to look at the water, and he was going to speak as though he were alone, and she was going to let him, because it was the only way the sentences were going to survive leaving him. "I'm not going to apologize to you," he said. "Not in the way you might expect. I know what was done. I know what I did, and I know what I stood by while others did it, and I know what a house I grew up in did to you, in a room I had walked through every day of my childhood. I know these things. I have not stopped knowing them. I do not imagine, Granger, that I ever will." He paused. "An apology from me to you would be an obscenity. It would be a tidy thing, and what was done was not tidy. I am not going to offer you tidy." Her hand, the one holding the pebble, had begun to tremble very slightly. She closed her fingers over it. The trembling moved instead into her jaw. She clenched that, and it moved into her breathing. She gave up. "What I will say," he went on, still to the water, "is that there is not an hour, Granger, in which I do not think of it. Not a meal, not a lesson. I do not sleep well, and the reason I do not sleep well is that the instant I stop occupying myself with something else, the drawing room is there. Your voice is there. Your hair on the marble is there. My aunt's." He stopped. His jaw moved. "I do not need to list it for you. You were the one on the floor. You know the inventory better than I do." She could not speak. She did not try. "I do not bring this up to make you comfort me. That would be another obscenity. I bring it up because I want you to understand what it meant to me to find that clipping. I did not. I want you to understand that I did not go looking. The prophet fell. I bent to pick it up. The date was circled. And the feeling I had, Granger." He stopped. He had to. "The feeling I had was that the universe had handed me, by accident, a piece of information I had no right to, and that it was the first piece of information I had been given in a year that I could do something small and decent with. Not to redeem myself. I do not use that word about myself. I have not earned it, and I may not live long enough to earn it. But simply to do one thing, once, that was the right size. The right size." She understood with a small internal lurch what he meant. He meant that every other gesture available to him, every public apology, every act of restitution, every grand dramatic scene of contrition he might have staged, would have been the wrong size. Too large. A performance. A demand disguised as an offering for her to witness his remorse and certify it. He had wanted a gesture small enough to be accepted without her having to perform anything in return. A pebble, a flower, a single line of parchment, a gesture the exact size of her. "I didn't want you to be alone with the day," he said. "That was all. I don't want anything from you, Granger. I will not ask for anything. What I did this morning it was mine to do, and I did it, and you don't owe me a thing for it. Not a thank you, not a conversation, not even this. Malfoy, I'm not finished." "All right." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone down another half step, as though he was speaking from somewhere further inside himself. "There is one more thing, and I'm saying it because you deserve to hear it once, from me, and then never again unless you ask. I am aware of you. I have been aware of you for some time. I don't know when it started. I don't know that knowing would help. What I know is that it is there, and that I am not going to do anything with it, and that I am not telling you so that you will do anything with it either. I am telling you because you are a person who requires the whole truth of a situation in order to think clearly in it, and I will not be the person who denies you that. You know now. Do with it what you need to do. If what you need to do is nothing, then that is what we will do. If what you need to do is never speak to me outside of the patrol roster again, I will arrange it so that you do not have to." He stopped. The lake made its small sounds. Hermione sat very still. Her hand was still closed over the pebble. Her other hand had found, somewhere in the last minute, the sprig of Michaelmas daisy that she realized only now, taken with her from the glass on her desk, tucked into the cuff of her sleeve, because she had not wanted to leave it alone in her room. She did not know for a long moment what she was going to say. She could have said many things. She could have said, "I am aware of you too," which was true, and which would have been the shortest route to the end of the conversation. She could have said, "I don't know what I am," which was also true, and which would have been the route of honesty. She could have said, "Thank you," and she thought of it. She formed the word, and then she did not say it, because he was right, and "thank you" would have been the wrong size. What she said instead was the thing she had not known she was going to say until it was already out of her mouth. "Look at me." He did, slowly, against, she could see, every instinct he had. He turned his head and he looked at her fully, and she held his eyes. And then, because she had understood in the last 90 seconds that this was the gesture he had never permitted himself, the one she would have to give him permission for, she turned her left arm over in her lap, and she pushed back the sleeve of her robe, and she bared the scar to the morning light. He did not look away. It took him a long, measurable second. She watched it pass across his face, the flinch he suppressed, the swallow, the small tightening at the corner of his jaw. And then he did the thing she had not been sure he would be able to do. He looked at it, fully, without the averting, without the discipline. He looked at the word carved into her forearm, and he let himself see it, and he did not perform anything with his face, and he did not make a speech about it, and he did not reach for it, and he did not reach for her. He only looked, and let it be looked at. Her eyes filled. She had not cried since May. She did not cry now, not properly. But 2 tears went, without her permission, down her face, and she did not wipe them, because to wipe them would be to break the looking, and the looking was the thing that mattered. "All right," she said, very quietly. "All right what?" "All right, Malfoy. I don't... You said I should do with it what I need to do. All right. This is what I need to do." "What is?" She took a breath. It was uneven. She did not try to even it. "I need you," she said, "to stop not looking at me. I need you to stop setting quills down instead of handing them to me. I need you to stop leaving rooms when I come in. You have been careful with me, Malfoy, in a way I did not ask you to be, and I understand why you have, and I am telling you now that I do not want it any more. Whatever else happens, whatever I decide about the other thing you said, I am telling you that I do not want to be treated like a thing that might break if you stand too close to it. Do you understand?" He had gone very still. "I understand." "Good." She pulled her sleeve back down over the scar. The morning was bright on the lake. The heron had come back at some point while he had been speaking, and was standing in the shallows on one leg again, considering its decision. She did not look at the heron. She looked at him. He was looking at her, properly, the way he had not looked at her in a year. The way, she understood now, he had not permitted himself to look at anyone in a year, as though the act of looking were an offering, and he had not believed he had anything worth offering. "Malfoy." "Yes." "The daisy is very beautiful. Thank you for the daisy." "I thought you weren't going to..." "I know. I changed my mind." And this time, when the corner of his mouth pulled, the small, unsteady thing that moved across his face was, unmistakably, a smile. The first one she had seen on him since before the war. And it lasted, perhaps, a second and a half. And she understood that she was going to remember it, like the arc his thumb had cleared on the window for the rest of her life. The day after that moved oddly. It moved the way days move when something in their structure has been quietly altered and the world has not yet caught up with the alteration. She went to arithmancy. She took notes. Professor Vector asked her a question about the convergence of a sequence, and she answered it correctly and could not have said 5 minutes later what she had answered. At lunch, she ate a whole bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and Ginny, beside her, looked at her for a long moment over the rim of a pumpkin juice and did not say anything, because Ginny had the particular tact of a woman who had grown up with 6 brothers and had learned, young, when a silence wanted to be let alone. The pebble sat in Hermione's pocket all day. The parchment sat against her ribs. She did not see him at lunch. She did not see him in the corridor between Charms and the library. She did not see him at tea. She understood that he was giving her a day, that he had said what he had said at the boathouse, and was now, with the same careful discipline with which he did everything, letting the saying breathe without himself in the room. She found that she did not mind this. She found, more strangely, that she was grateful for it, because the thing he had said, "I am aware of you," was sitting inside her chest like a lit lamp in a room she had not been in for a long time, and she needed the afternoon to walk around it and see what it illuminated. What it illuminated, among other things, was the fact that she had known. She had known for weeks. She had known without letting herself know, in the way a person knows a door is unlocked without trying the handle. She had known in the library when she had understood that the monograph had been left for her. She had known in the gallery when her hand had lifted toward his sleeve without her permission. She had known at the window in the storm, with 1 inch of ancient granite between their hands, and her understanding that the inch was hers, and that he would not cross it. She had known. And this was the part that she had to sit with, on the stone bench outside the arithmancy corridor, with her head tipped back against the wall. She had wanted him not to cross it, not because she did not want him to, but because she had not yet been ready to admit that she did. Now, somewhere between the boathouse and the bench, she had admitted it. She did not know what to do with the admission. She did not know what to do with the fact that, for the first time in 4 months, she was thinking about a thing that was not behind her. She had gone so long with her whole self oriented backwards, toward the tent, the forest, the drawing room, the field at the end of May, that she had forgotten what the opposite of that orientation felt like. The opposite of it, she was realizing, felt like this: sitting on a stone bench on an afternoon in September with a pebble in your pocket, and the awareness, somewhere below your sternum, of a door that had opened that morning and was still, now, open. She went to dinner. He was at the Slytherin table. She saw him the moment she entered the hall, and he saw her, and his eyes met hers for a full, steady moment across the room. No averting, no discipline, no careful looking elsewhere. And then he bent his head to his plate again, because he had promised, at the lake, to stop not looking. But he had not promised to stage anything for the great hall, and she was glad of it. It was enough. The glance had been the length of a held breath. It had been the length of the whole afternoon that she had spent walking around the lit lamp inside her chest. She ate. She talked to Ginny. She laughed once, a small, surprised laugh at something Luna said about the moon. And Ginny looked at her again, sighed long, and smiled a small, sideways smile, and did not comment. After dinner, in the head's study, she sat down at the desk and wrote a note in her own hand. The astronomy tower. 11 o'clock, if you want to. She did not sign it. She folded it once. She did not send it by owl. She waited until the study was empty, and then she crossed the landing and slid it under his door. And she went back to her own room, and she sat on her bed. And she did not know what she had just done, exactly, but she knew that it was the first thing in 4 months she had done that was pointed forward rather than back. At 11:15, she went up. The castle at night in September had a particular smell after rain, the smell of wet stone and cold ivy, and, very faintly, wood smoke from the fires that had been lit in the common rooms. The corridors were empty. Filch was patrolling the dungeons. She had written the roster, she knew. The staircases shifted quietly under her feet, as though even they were trying not to disturb whatever was happening. She reached the top of the astronomy tower at 11:02. He was already there. He was standing at the parapet, his back to the door, his hands on the stone. He had taken off his school robe. He was in his white shirt and his dark trousers, and the shirt, in the lantern light that spilled from the sconce at the head of the stair, was the colour of candlelight itself. He had lit 2 candles on the low stone bench beside him. Only 2. He had understood, she thought, without being told, that more would have been a production. She stepped out onto the platform. He did not turn. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Neither was I. I thought about not." "So did I." He turned then. The lantern behind her put her in silhouette. The candles on the bench put him in a warm, low light that was kinder to his face than any light had been kind to it in a year. He looked, she thought, younger by the candlelight. He looked the age he actually was, which was 18, which was something they had both forgotten. "Come here," he said, quietly, not a command, an invitation. She came. She stopped perhaps a foot from him. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The stars above the tower were very clear after the storm. The lake below was a sheet of black with a single strip of moonlight laid across it like a folded ribbon. A nightjar called once somewhere in the forest. "Granger." "Yes. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. I am going to be clumsy. I want to warn you. Malfoy, I have never in my life been less concerned with elegance." He made a small sound that was almost a laugh. His hands, which had been at the parapet, came up, slowly, carefully, giving her every second in which to step back. And he lifted them to her face, and he did not touch her face yet. He held them an inch from her jaw on either side, his palms open, the way he had held that hand at his side in the gallery, the way he had held it on the windowsill in the storm. He held his hands near her face, and he looked at her, and he did not move. And she understood that this, too, was an inch that was hers. He was offering it. He was not going to cross it unless she did. She closed the inch. She leaned her face forward the smallest fraction, and his palms met her skin, and the warmth of them, the astonishing, unexpected warmth of his hands on her face, after so many months of being untouched by anyone, made a small sound come out of her that she had not intended to make. He breathed out once, as though he had been holding the breath since the gallery. He did not kiss her yet. He put his forehead against hers. His hands on her face were not unsteady, but they were alive. She could feel the pulse in them, at the base of his thumbs, and she thought, "He is terrified, and he is letting me feel that he is terrified, and he is not hiding it." She closed her eyes. Her own hands came up finally and found the fronts of his shirt, not gripping, just laid flat against the warm linen over his ribs, and she felt his heart under her right hand beating very fast, very even. Not the heartbeat of a man composing himself, but the heartbeat of a man letting himself be, for the first time in a long time, simply present in his own chest. "Granger," he said, a whisper. "Yes." "May I?" "Yes." He kissed her. It was not a triumphant kiss. It was not the kiss of a man who had won something. It was the kiss of a man who had been walking for a long time in the cold and had been let, at last, into a warm room and was standing inside the doorway trying to remember how to be indoors. His mouth on hers was careful and warm and trembling, and the tremble was not nervous. It was the tremble of a thing long denied that has finally been permitted. She kissed him back. She kissed him back with the whole of the held breath she had been holding since the storm, and she felt, beneath her right palm, his heart stutter once and resume, faster. When he drew back, he did not go far. He put his forehead against hers again. His thumbs on her cheekbones moved once, the smallest arc, the same arc, she realized, with a small internal lurch that his thumb had cleared on the fogged window during the storm. An arc of seeing, an arc of making space to see. "Granger," he said against her mouth. Your hair is down. I know. It's down today, of all days." "I noticed that too." "Was that? It wasn't for anyone. It was for me. I hadn't wanted to wear it down in a long time. This morning I did." He breathed out. His hands stayed on her face. "Happy birthday, Granger," he said, very softly. "I know you didn't want the word. I am saying it anyway, once. And then I will not say it again." And she laughed, actually laughed, a small wet laugh against his mouth. And she tipped her face up and kissed him a second time. And this kiss was less trembling than the first, because something in both of them had found in the minute between a footing. The candles on the bench guttered in a small eddy of wind. The stars went on above them. Down on the lake, the folded ribbon of moonlight shifted, unfolded, lay itself differently across the water, and neither of them saw, because neither of them, for several long moments, was looking anywhere but at the other. Dawn came slowly to the tower. They had not stayed on the platform all night. She had, at some point after midnight, grown cold. And he had, without asking, taken his outer robe from where it was folded on the stone bench and put it around her shoulders. And they had come down the winding stair together with his hand at the small of her back, not possessively, not demonstratively, simply as a point of contact that neither of them, having found, was willing to give up. They had walked back through the sleeping castle in silence. At the door to her room, he had paused, and she had paused, and they had looked at each other in the blue pre-morning light of the landing, and he had not come in. She had not asked him to. Neither of them had needed to speak about it. He had lifted her hand once, and pressed his mouth briefly to the inside of her wrist, above the pulse, below the sleeve, on the unmarked skin. And he had gone back across the landing to his own door, and she had gone in, and she had lain down on her bed in her clothes, and she had slept. She had slept for 5 hours. The lamp had not been lit. Now she stood at the window of her room with a cup of tea in her hands, watching the sun find the lake. The water was pale gold at the edges, where the light touched it, and still dark in the middle, where the light had not yet arrived. And she thought, in a distant and unhurried way, that this was the first morning in a long time when she had watched the world become itself without being afraid of what it was becoming. There was a soft knock at her door. She opened it. He was there, in a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He held 2 cups. He had brought tea because she already had tea, and he did not know that, and the redundancy of the gesture pleased her in a way she did not attempt to examine. "Oh," he said, "I made some already." "I see. Come in." He came in. He set his cups down on her desk, beside the glass in which the sprig of Michaelmas daisy was still standing. The bead of rain had evaporated, but the flower itself had held, and would hold, she knew, for several more days. He did not sit. He stood near the desk with his hands behind his back, the way he had stood in her doorway months ago when they had first been asked to share the study, and she understood, with a small pull of amusement, that he did not quite know what the protocol was for being in her room in the morning, and that he was defaulting, in the absence of better information, to formality. "Malfoy." "Yes." "Sit down. You're hovering." "I wasn't sure if—" "Sit down." He sat, on her desk chair, properly, his back straight. She sat on the edge of her bed with her cup in her lap. They looked at each other across the small room. The morning light came through the window and laid itself in a long bar across the floor between them. "Last night happened," she said. "Yes." I wanted to say it out loud, before either of us spent the day deciding we'd dreamed it. "I wasn't going to decide that." "Weren't you?" "No." He said it evenly. "I was going to wait and let you decide whatever you decided, and I was going to abide by it. But I was not going to decide it had been a dream. I know the difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The light on his hair was the pale gold of the water at the edge of the lake. He was, she realized again, 18. They were both 18. For so much of the last year she had felt like a woman of 40 living in the body of a girl. And now, this morning, looking at him in her desk chair with his back too straight and his hands on his knees, she felt, for perhaps a quarter of a second, like a girl. "I haven't decided anything yet," she said. "I want to be honest about that." "All right." "I don't know what this is. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know how I carry what is between us and also carry what is behind us. I don't know that yet, Malfoy. I won't pretend I do. I wouldn't want you to. But," he looked up. "But," she said, "I am not going to decide any of it today. Today I am going to drink my tea, and I am going to go to ancient runes, and at lunch I am going to sit with Ginny, and at some point this afternoon I am going to find you in the library, and I am going to sit at the table where you are sitting, and we are going to work in the same silence we have worked in for a month, and it is going to feel different, because we will both know it is different, and that will be enough for today. Do you understand?" Yes. The rest of it, whatever we are, whatever we will be, whatever we will have to tell Harry and Ron and your mother and the prophet and the rest of the world, we will think about later. I am giving us permission today not to think about any of it. All right. Good. He looked down at his hands. Then he looked up again, and there was the smallest possible pull at the corner of his mouth. The almost smile she had seen at the boathouse. The almost smile she had seen in the candlelight at the top of the tower. And he said very quietly, "Granger." "Yes, you slept." "I did. Without the lamp. Without the lamp." He was quiet for a moment. "I noticed," he said, "that you did not light it last night when we came back. I was standing in the corridor after you had closed the door. I waited. I don't know why I waited. I wanted to see if the light went on under your door. It didn't. I stood there for about a minute, and it didn't. Were you worried?" "No, I was something. I didn't have the word for it." She set her cup down on the bedside table. She got up. She crossed the small room. She took his face in both her hands, and she kissed him, once, on the mouth, quickly and firmly and without drama, the way a person kisses someone they have decided, in that instant, is theirs to kiss. When she drew back, his eyes were closed. "The word," she said, "may have been relief." "Yes." He opened his eyes. "That one. We'll get you more of them. Words. Eventually. Bossy. Always." She went back to her bed. She sat down. She picked up her cup. He watched her with the pale, careful attention he had always given her, and was now, for the first time, allowed to give her openly, and she drank her tea, and the bar of morning light moved by a small degree across the floor, and the day began, properly, to be a day. They did not stay long in the room. She had ancient runes at 9. He had potions. They went down to breakfast together, which they had never done, and which was, to anyone who noticed, not especially remarkable. 2 heads on the same staircase at the same hour. But Ginny noticed, because Ginny noticed everything. And when Hermione sat down beside her at the Gryffindor table, Ginny leaned in very slightly and said, without turning her head, "Your hair is down." "I know. 2 days running." "I know. I'm not going to ask." "Thank you. I am going to ask eventually." "I know." Hermione reached for the toast. Ginny, beside her, cut open an orange and pretended, with impeccable discipline, to be interested in nothing at all. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy sat where he always sat, and ate his breakfast with the same economy with which he did everything. And at one point, between the tea and the second piece of toast, he looked up across the room. Not long, not demonstratively, simply the space of a held breath. And he met her eyes, and she met his, and the look they exchanged was not a declaration. It was an acknowledgement. It was the quiet confirmation across the oldest and loudest room in the castle that the thing which had begun the night before on a tower under the stars was still there in the morning, over the toast, under the enchanted ceiling that was showing. Today, the pale, clear blue of a September that had, against all expectation, decided to be kind. She looked down at her plate. She was smiling slightly. She did not try to stop. In her pocket, the pebble he'd given her 24 hours earlier sat warm against her thigh. In the glass on her desk upstairs, the sprig of Michaelmas daisy stood in a 1/4 inch of water. In the inside pocket of her robe, against her ribs, was the folded parchment with a single line of his handwriting, which she had not been able to bring herself to leave in her room. Later, weeks later, when the autumn had deepened into the particular cold that Scotland kept for November, when she and Draco Malfoy had learned to walk together in the corridors without either of them noticing they were walking together, when Ginny had asked, and Harry had asked, and Ron had asked, and she had answered all of them in the same quiet, steady voice, when Narcissa Malfoy had written her a letter in a handwriting as careful as her son's, and she had written back when the first of the long, slow conversations with Draco about the drawing room had been had, and the second, and the third, and the ones that would have to keep being had for years. She would look back on the morning after her 19th birthday, on the bar of light across the floor of her room, on the too straight back of the boy in her desk chair, on the small, firm kiss she had pressed to his mouth without warning, and she would understand that this was the morning the story had changed. Not the night before, not the kiss under the stars, the morning after. The morning when she had decided, and he had accepted, that they were going to build this slowly, in the ordinary light of ordinary days, over toast and tea and silence and small, unremarkable glances across loud rooms. The lamp beside her bed, that night, she did not light, and she did not light it the night after. And after a while, she put it away in the bottom of her trunk, because the trunk was the proper place for things one had needed once and no longer needed. And she closed the lid on it, and she turned, in the dark of her room, to the window, where the moon was making its slow, familiar passage over the lake, and somewhere across the landing, in a room she had never yet been inside, but would, in time, she knew a boy was lying awake in the same dark, and that his window faced east, and that when the morning came, it would find both of them already turned, without knowing it, toward the same light.
Hey, thank you for staying until the end. I wanted to write a soft story, a story about healing, not a big, loud love, a quiet one. Hermione sleeps with the lamp on. Draco keeps his sleeve buttoned. They are both tired, they are both hurt, and they find each other slowly, very slowly. I think sometimes love is not loud. Sometimes love is a small pebble, a flower on the floor, one line on a piece of paper, someone who sees you and does not ask you to smile. If you have a hard day today, I hope this story helped, even a little. If you like it, please like the video, leave a comment, tell me your favorite moment. It really helps me. And remember, you can put the lamp away too, when you are ready. Only when you are ready. Thank you. See you in the next story.